How to win your wife or your long-term relationship lover back whenever she or you or both have past or present emotional trauma, PTSD, or even betrayal trauma. Let's get started.
You just got to be coachable.
Guys, if you're trying to restore your marriage or your long-term relationship, please do us a favor. Right now, less than 10% of you are actually subscribers to this channel. Please serve your other brothers by telling YouTube this content is of value. Take a stand for marriage. If you're standing for your marriage right now, please do us a favor. Go on and press the subscribe button, and most importantly, press the little bell button so that this content is served up to you in real time as we deliver it, but also so it'll reach the other people who are in your exact shoes. In case you don't already know who I am, my name is Denver Griffin, and I help men restore their relationship or their marriage with their long-term relationship lover or their wife when she's not willing to work on the relationship, has lost all hope, or has zero interest in joining you on the journey. As of the recording of this video, I've been doing this for just over a decade. And here's how I can help you today. One of the questions that I get very often whenever a man is facing relationship challenges, doing a separation, or facing an unwanted divorce or separation from their lover or their wife forever is, how do I restore or mend the relationship whenever she is dealing with emotional trauma, past betrayal trauma, PTSD, all of these issues. Maybe she even has a counselor and she's going through those things, and you can't see a path to restore the relationship or the marriage while she's going through that. Maybe you're going through some of that, and I am going to cover that in another video in the near future. Today we're going to focus on how do you deal this when she's dealing with that, when she's dealing with the past betrayal trauma, PTSD, or emotional trauma, which oftentimes leads to her feeling emotionally unsafe in the relationship, with more often than not, this leads to a lot of women feeling physically unsafe within the relationship when there's no past evidence of physical abuse. So how do you restore the marriage if this is something you're dealing with? First, I want to let you know in my current marriage, both my wife and myself dealt with past betrayal, PTSD, emotional unsafety, and trauma. But our marriage was still restored in spite of all of these things. So how did we do it? First thing that we need to do is understand, why is this surfacing now? If you're in a long-term relationship or a marriage and all of a sudden now this is an obstacle, I want you to ask yourself, was this an obstacle when we met and we fell in love and we said I do? The reason this is all of a sudden surfacing now, even though you guys have been together many years, and it's never really been an overwhelming obstacle in your marriage or your long-term relationship, and it might have been somewhat of an issue, but now you're finding out that, wow, this is becoming a deal breaker where we can't reconcile the relationship, we can't reconcile the marriage until she deals with her past emotional safety or lack of, her past trauma. So why is all of this coming out? Why is her PTSD now an obstacle to you guys restoring this relationship? The reason for this is because it's almost always coupled with confirmation bias. You guys hear me talk about this a lot in my videos. So here's what I mean by this. If she has dealt with past relationship histories, this could have stemmed all the way back to childhood trauma. And I promise you, I can totally understand this. I can relate to this because I had the worst freaking childhood that somebody could probably experience outside of being raised in a third world country where we didn't have food. I had food, but outside of that, it was emotional unsafety, emotional and physical trauma from the time I think I was about 4 years old, or maybe even before. I think from the time I was born up until the time I left my home. The reason that I bring this up is I'm very thankful that I actually had to experience a horrific childhood, because it effed me up for the majority of my life until I actually learned how to deal with that. And I can tell you that it was one of the large contributing factors to the downfall of the failure of my first long-term relationship of 23 years with my first wife, was because I didn't understand how to navigate that and deal with that. But guess what? With that wife, I fell in love. We went down the aisle, we got married, and we had some really good years. But some of this stuff in me and in my current wife, in my next marriage, that's over a decade now, some of this stuff resurfaced when we were going through our separation. And so it was an obstacle to marriage restoration for me to reconcile the relationship or the marriage with my current wife, because she had a lot of this. She had some that she dealt with from childhood, and she had a lot of it that she had stacked up from her first marriage. She was in a marriage for about 20 years, and there was a shit ton of lack of emotional safety, honestly, there was a lack of physical safety, financial safety, all these different types of things as she was going through childhood and some of the stuff that she experienced from her first marriage. So why am I bringing this up? And why were these obstacles something that we experienced in our marriage that were an obstacle in my mind, or so I thought, in the process to restore the marriage? Well, let me explain. With my current marriage, everything was kind of peachy until I was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer, and that cancer stole a lot of our wealth because I couldn't work for about 2 years. And something that we had never dealt with in the marriage before was my wife feeling emotionally unsafe, financially insecure. Everything was on point until we went through that period there where I wasn't able to work anymore. It depleted our finances. We were on this world trip trying to figure out how to save my life. And there was a lot of obstacles that caused her to manifest in fear. And so what happened was, as our relationship started to break down because of what we were going through with cancer, with me being a patient, her being a nurse, that robbed us of intimacy, what happened was some of her past confirmation biases that she had had from growing up, some of the things she had experienced whenever she grew up as a child, as she became a young adult in her teenage years. Her mom and dad went through a hardship. They had a bankruptcy that robbed them of their business. And it actually ended up causing them to lose their home. And that caused her to feel emotionally unsafe, which even manifested in physical unsafety. And that was something that I never saw come up, or what never was manifested in our marriage, up until the point that we were still emotionally secure. But because I wasn't working, and because I became this big old grumpy jerk that was a patient, that was taking medication, and I acted like a complete horse's ass because of the way that I allowed myself to respond to that, I didn't do a good enough job managing my body, managing my mind. And so I would use the excuses of, well, don't you know I have cancer, so I have a right to be a big asshole, which I didn't. But that was a story that I was telling myself. And that caused the confirmation bias that my wife had against maybe even her own father, which probably wasn't justified. What they went through may or may not have been his fault. You know, stuff happens, life happens. Regardless of that, it caused her to actually stack that confirmation bias that she had from her teenage years onto her relationship with me, and then onto me personally. And resentment started building up to the point that, wow, she needs counseling for her PTSD, for her lack of emotional safety. And then it starts stacking up some of the things that she was triggered from in her first marriage. She was in a long-term relationship, a couple of them actually, where there was drug abuse, where there was theft of the family finances. And so all of that fear started flooding back to her because I wasn't working. It started triggering her to start remembering, oh my God, what was it like whenever I was a single mom trying to support 3 kids and I didn't have hot water? And that means I couldn't trust my dad. It means I couldn't trust my first long-term relationship. I couldn't trust my second long-term relationship. And so what started to happen was our relationship and me personally started paying the price for her past trauma, for her past PTSD. And guess what? It wasn't my fault. But guess who else was paying the price for that? My wife. Guess who else was paying the price for that? Our children. Guess who else was paying the price for that? Our grandchildren. And guess what happened when she started getting counseling for that, when we ultimately got separated? The counselor, who was a freaking moron, as so many of them are. I'm not a big advocate of counselor. I will tell you this, a good counselor is worth their weight in gold. I just don't know many of them. And particularly because I'm in the business of restoring marriages, you know, over 91% of people that seek marriage counseling end up in divorce. Now, if you need counseling for emotional trauma and PTSD, all of those things, I'm not discouraging you from doing that, but I'm going to tell you what happens more often than not. Whenever somebody is having emotional trauma, past behavioral trauma, emotional betrayal trauma, physical safety trauma, if they go to a counselor and they start saying, okay, I'm separated from my husband, I'm separating from my long-term relationship lover, and because of all the things that he's been doing in the relationship, the way that he's been talking to me, the way that our finances have been ran, he's not working as much as he should have. What happens more often than not is your wife or your lover will enroll the counselor into the fact that you are the one triggering this trauma. And guess what? You are the one triggering it. But that doesn't mean that it's your fault. And guess what? Maybe a lot of what's being triggered is things that you've called. Maybe you were a shitty husband. Maybe you cheated on her. Maybe you blew the finances on drugs. But are you still doing all of that shit? Probably not. If you're watching this video, I'm going to say you probably have already turned. Your heart's turned, you've lost 20 pounds in the last 5 or 6 weeks or more. And if that's you, put that in the comments. I'd like to know. But here's what I'm saying. If you've done everything that you could to become the best version of you, by the way, if you're experiencing emotional trauma and you're dealing with these issues and you're going to counseling and you've been enrolled in the bullshit that your marriage or your relationship can't be restored until you get completely emotionally healed and you're dealing with a counselor who's charging you by the hour, Have you ever seen all these videos like back in the day where people are going to therapy in New York and they're living in Manhattan and they have a therapist that they've been working with for 5 or 6 years and they're charging them by the hour? How many therapists are going to tell you, oh, okay, I'm going to take you the fastest road to recovery and getting over your trauma if they're billing you by the hour? Would that be a good business decision for their business? I don't know. Do they have the most up-to-date character? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I will tell you this, in that industry, it's very normal to be in counseling forever. And by the way, I'm going to challenge something on that. I deal with all of this in the Divorce Stoppers program. And guess what? It's not the first thing that I deal with. In the program, as it stands today, we have 15 steps. I don't really even start addressing this until the 12th step, and then we take it hot and heavy on the 14th step. I will tell you in the 7-week program, we address how can you restore the relationship in the 4th week in spite of these traumas. And here's the reason we don't start off with that. These traumas are problems. And working on the problems in a marriage or in a long-term relationship is never the problem. It's not the reason your relationship can't be restored. It's not the reason that you guys can't be reconciled. It's not the reason you and your wife can't be back in the same house. But if she's seeing a counselor, they're going to tell her that it is because they don't know what the fuck they're doing, because that's complete horse crap. Well, how do I know that? My wife and I both were dealing with that. But I chose to table all of that crap and say, you know what? I'm going to put all of that on pause and focus on what do I need to do to get us back under the same roof. She was living 2,000 miles away from me and we were physically separated. And I thought, you know what? We've tried talking about our trauma. We've tried talking about our issues. We've tried addressing how do we heal from all of the damage that this mouth caused, from all of the damage that her mouth was causing, from all of the damage that her stupid counselor was causing by listening to her and then enabling her to exit the relationship by telling her I was responsible for the trauma. And guess what? Did I trigger the trauma? Dang right I did. Did that mean that we couldn't reconcile our marriage because of that? No. So here's the first thing that I want to tell you. Number one, your relationship can actually be reconciled without either one of you healing from your past betrayal or emotional trauma. Your relationship or your marriage can be reconciled without healing from PTSD. Let me tell you something else. Number two, healing your relationship can 10x the speed after you guys are back together. Healing betrayal trauma, healing PTSD, healing emotional trauma, if it's caused by and within the marriage and that's all you're dealing with, the way that you resolve that is reconciling the marriage. You do what it takes to come back under the same roof and hang out, have fun, and hook up. Hang out, have fun, and hook up. Positive, polite, and playful. Positive, polite, and playful. By you taking the lead to establish new positive relationship histories that lead her out of confirmation bias. So how do you restore a marriage or a long-term relationship when either you or her or both of you are dealing with all of this trauma? You reconcile and you make the marriage fun again. We could put a red hat on. Make marriages fun again. This is what it takes to get you guys back under the same roof. If you're thinking, well, Denver, I've tried this. I'm listening to your videos and I'm seeing some wins, but then it'll backfire. If that's what you're seeing, 90% of you that watch these videos, you tell me, thanks for the advice. It helped us get back in the same house. But for those of you that are saying that means your wife doesn't have confirmation bias. For those of you that are dealing with this when she has confirmation bias, and guess what? A lot of the time, PTSD, betrayal trauma, emotional trauma, not only is it caused from confirmation bias within the marriage, you are paying the price from confirmation bias that started way before you met this woman. This confirmation bias started with her father. This confirmation bias started with a male father figure or somebody else that had a penis that was in her life before she ever left her home. This confirmation bias started with another man, 2 other men, 3 other men, 4 other men before she ever met you. All of that confirmation bias is stacked on top of stack on top of stack. This is like you are getting The quadruple stack from the IHOP when you got this woman, and neither one of you knew it until you gave her something to trigger it, and you started stacking some on top of that by yourself by showing up maybe not the best spouse or maybe not the best long-term relationship lover that you should have. And now you're paying the price for all of those past histories and your current past histories yourself. So how do you navigate out of that? Well, first, I want you to do me a favor right now. If this is you, I want you to put in the comments, this is exactly what I'm dealing with, Denver. Nobody's ever explained it this way. I see exactly what you're saying. This is exactly where I'm at. Well, how do you navigate the waters out of that? If you haven't already subscribed, do it now. Subscribe and hit the bell button because this stuff helps. This stuff helps people. Help me help you by pressing the subscribe button, and please, 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 please press that bell button also. So the way that you restore a marriage or a long-term relationship when you're dealing with PTSD, emotional trauma, past betrayal trauma, no matter the reason, one of the things that you can do to heal yourself and also to help your lover heal is restore the relationship first. And part of the restoration process, as you're taking the journey to dissolve confirmation bias within the relationship, which, by the way, what is confirmation bias? It's thoughts with past negative relationship histories, whether it was with people before you that caused it, or you, or both. These thoughts, these negative thought patterns, have been psychological so long, running the neural pathways psychologically so long that they have become biological and we can see them on a brain scan. Well, Denver, how do I get rid of that? Don't I need to address PTSD first? Doesn't she need to heal from her emotional trauma from her childhood? Doesn't she need to heal from the betrayal trauma within their marriage or the relationship where I've hurt her, where I've robbed from her, I've stolen from her, I've cheated on her, I've hurt her? No, none of that has to be healed before you guys reconcile. And it is so much easier and faster for those things to be healed within the relationship after it's healed. And the first thing that we always do is we take the walk of getting rid of the confirmation bias. 99 times out of 100, when we dissolve confirmation bias, PTSD will dissolve with it. It naturally goes away. But Denver, what if it doesn't go away when I get rid of the confirmation bias? And how do I get rid of the confirmation bias? If you think you're dealing with confirmation bias, I want you to put in the comments right now, why do you think, or why do you know for a fact that you're dealing with confirmation bias? And I also want you to include, what is that costing you? And if that's where you're at, stick that in the comments right now. I'd like to hear from you because it's going to give me some video ideas if you'll explain that for future content. But let's talk about, how do you actually get rid of confirmation bias? 3 things. In the DivorceStoppers program, I spend the entire program, the 7-week program, teaching you how to dissolve confirmation bias in the very beginning. We turn the train that's heading toward the end of the relationship around, and the goal is always to do that by 7 days in this 7-week journey. I didn't say we restored the relationship in 7 days. I said we stopped the train that's heading toward divorce. We stopped the train that's heading toward her ending up with another lover, a new relationship, pregnant with another man's baby, and you guys are never going to be back together. The goal is always to turn that train around by day number 7. Well, Denver, how in the hell do you do that? 3 words: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Well, Denver, it sounds like you guys are running a coup over there. We are. It's called knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. When you have the correct knowledge, understanding correctly how to implement the knowledge, and wisdom on how to actually consistently do it every single week so that you don't walk forward 3 weeks and then screw up and start over again, you can't do that. Why not, Denver? Because it takes 7 weeks to dissolve confirmation bias. Those neural pathways that we can see on a brain scan, you have to land the plane in the correct field every single week for 7 weeks if we want the brain scan to show up differently. This means that if your wife is dealing with this, or if your lover is having these issues, it takes 7 weeks of doing everything the correct way in order to change her thought patterns. So what I'm telling you is, you becoming the best version of yourself, like all the other programs are out there teaching, not only is it not going to work, it's actually going to make things worse. If that's you, put that in the comments. Tell me about that. So how do I know this? Because 41% of the clients that come into my program come from other programs, because all the other programs, they don't deal with confirmation bias first. And if you don't deal with confirmation bias first, when she wants out and you want to stay in, the marriage or the relationship is not going to be restored. Becoming the best you is not going to fix it. Dealing with your emotional trauma is not only not necessary, it's not going to fix it. It'll actually backfire on you. If you go fix yourself and you leave her in the sidelines, you leave her behind and she still has her emotional trauma, her betrayal trauma, her PTSD, she will resent you for becoming the best you because she's still hurting. She's telling you, oh, I felt responsible for your unhappiness. The reason she did is because she was unhappy already. I'm telling you in this program, in the DivorceStoppers program, I actually teach you how to lead her back to the best version of herself. And it takes 7 days to get her on the train track doing that. She doesn't have to heal from PTSD. She doesn't have to heal from betrayal trauma. She doesn't have to heal from emotional trauma in order to start the process of dissolving confirmation bias. Well, Denver, I'm doing that some from watching your videos. If she has full-blown confirmation bias, YouTube is information. I have a program at denvergriffin.com that's called DivorceStoppers. And right now what I'm offering is every single week, almost daily, I'm running a free masterclass that can give you the beginning steps of how do you get rid of confirmation bias. This is the beginning of healing the relationship. Go to denvergriffin.com/masterclass and register for my free masterclass today, right now, because we only have a few spots left for this week. I don't want you to miss that if you're dealing with this. denvergriffin.com. So Denver, can you explain to me why else does this work? Here's the reason that this works. If you're dealing with confirmation bias, all the information that you're getting here on YouTube is not going to restore it because you're dealing with something in her that has to transform. It's not enough for you to change. She's got to change too if you want this relationship salvaged. Let me say that again. This relationship, your marriage, will end if she has confirmation bias and you don't transform both of you out of that. And you will never do that focusing on the trauma, focusing on the problems, because here's the thing. What you think is the problem is never the problem. What her therapist thinks is the problem, which is probably you, is not the freaking problem. It's just confirmation bias and understanding how to lead somebody out of that. To lead somebody out of confirmation bias, it takes 7 weeks. Denver, why does it take 7 weeks? Because to change neural pathways to the point that we can see the confirmation bias has dissolved, you have to have transformation. The Bible calls this to be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Here's how you do it. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You have to have new relationship histories that are all positive consistently every single week for a full 7 weeks. Denver, how do you do that? Why don't you check out the masterclass where I talk about that? denvergriffin.com. denvergriffin.com, I explained that. That might be enough to get you back on track. If it's not, at the end of that masterclass, I give you an opportunity to book a call with me. But we do it consistently every week, because here's what happens. If you only lead her out of it from the information you're getting here on YouTube, and you find that you're consistently turning it around every single week for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, that's not enough, because at week number 5 or week number 4, if you mess it up, guess what? You start over. If you go to week number 3 and you start over, you go to week number 6 and you mess it up, you start over. Guess what happens if you start over enough times? You get divorced. She gets with another man. She gets remarried. She's pregnant with another baby daddy. This is why I say time is only on your side if you put it there. If this is you or this is something that you're struggling or you're dealing with, I can't encourage you enough. Please do me a favor. Go register for the masterclass before all of the seats are filled up. denvergriffin.com. Guys, something else that you can do. This actually reminds me, if this is something that you're dealing with yourself, maybe some of the stuff that you've done to cause her to confirmation bias, maybe you are the reason. Maybe her counselor is right or her shrink is right, that some of her PTSD or some of the stuff that's triggering her is your fault. And if that's something that you're dealing with and you're not really sure how to heal from that, this is something I would encourage you to believe this, okay? First is this. A lot of the stuff that you've been through in your life, where you have emotional trauma, you have past baggage, and I'm going to address this in another video. If that's something that you feel like you need, let me know that in the comments and I'll actually do a video on that. But I can tell you, as somebody that's dealt with so much of this crap myself in my own personal life and my own childhood, because of all types of abuse and just crazy stuff that happened to me as a child, that to this day I'm very, very thankful that it actually happened to me. But there was so much for nearly 40 years of my life. I was shrouded in guilt and shame and embarrassment from all of the abuse that wasn't even my fault. And then because of that, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and it wasn't healed, and I had so many inner vows that I had made and people that I blamed and had unforgiveness, and it really just held me back and hurt me my entire life, until I realized that my Creator allowed me to go through all of that shit because it's exactly what He planned, because it's exactly what He wanted to use to help me step into my calling, to help me serve the community of people that I'm supposed to serve. And so what was intended for my harm actually was used for my good. I actually did a client testimonial with one of my clients probably about 6 months or a year ago. His name was James. If this is something that you're personally dealing with, where you have guilt about, how you've responded to your own trauma and things like that, I'm going to put his story in the link in the comments, and then we'll have it at the end of the video as well. If you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button now, and most importantly, the bell button. And if you know anybody else that's dealing with any of this stuff, share the video. It might help them out. It's the law of reciprocity. Serve others and you'll be served.